Hello, I'm Forrest,
Hi, I'm Anthony.
and we're the Historical Students Association. And today, Anthony is going to be um, talking about something that he recently looked into. Anthony, take it away.
In my World History 114 class, um, recently we've been discussing the classical civilizations, um, and I wrote an essay, on-demand essay actually, on comparing two classical civilizations and comparing them to how they are socially, politically, and economically, also historically. Um, and I'm going to get into that. Just for a little brief background. So the classical civilization, depending on how you look at it, um, could could have started like as early as 700 BCE with like the Indo-European migrations into Persia. Persia and the Persian Empire is one of these regions in the classical civilization. Another is India, which are also Indo European migrations that migrated all the way down to India. And the other two, the ones that are the focus of my essay, are the Greco-Roman civilization in the West, the Mediterranean, and the Chinese civilization out into the Far East.
What time period is this?
This time period, the Greco-Roman civilizations, they have a far back history with like the early like ancient Greeks, like before like the Beta Greeks. Um, I forget what they called, the Mycenaeans.
Hellenistic
Yeah,
Greeks.
yeah, before the
Yeah.
Hellenistic age. But the Hellenistic age starts around the after the conquering of basically the entire known world by Alexander the Great. He was
Yeah.
great for that reason. But after the breakup of his empire, it left most of Western Mediterranean with a power vacuum, and that was between Carthage, which were the descendants of the Phoenicians, and Rome. And in Rome's case, it's very particular. See, Rome is kind of a result of a rebellion in the homeland in mainland Italy. Rome used to be kind of like any other kingdom you might see
Hmm.
in like the ancient European territory, but the people rebelled against their kingdom, and they actually instituted a republic. And
Yeah.
this is greatly influenced by that Greco empire from Alexander, also Sparta and Athens. So they based a lot of their constitution and form of government and social life based off the Greeks. They're very heavily off the
Yeah.
Greeks. And then that Roman Republic expanded to conquer the rest of Italy, mainland Italy, and that's where we get into the Punic Wars against Carthage.
Ah, those are fun.
Yeah, see, um, very very deadly, very disastrous on both ends. But the winner of the Punic Wars would basically determine who would rule the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean was a very wealthy um, part of the world in terms of trade and maritime trade, and both were really excellent in capturing that maritime trade. But at the end, uh, what's it called? The Roman Republic won. They absorbed Carthage and all the colonies, and they gained a huge amount of territory and economic prosperity because of it. Later on, you get emperors like Julius Caesar who proclaim themselves as first citizen, basically declaring themselves a dictatorship of this republic. And afterwards, many of these so-called emperors, but they're really dictatorships,
I mean,
disguised behind a republic that
keeping the
it's
facade of the
together.
republic going because,
Yeah,
oh, we can't have a king. I'm just the first among equals.
yeah, what's it called? It's a famous quote, actually. I forget by who, but it's a famous quote that the Roman Empire was a republic. Sorry, no, a dictatorship disguised as a republic,
Yeah.
as a democracy. And that's how the Roman Empire began its legacy. On the other side, in the East Asia territory, China had been a thing for a long time. One of the very early civilizations.
China's very old. It's fast. It's fascinating how old China is.
Yes, it's so old that most Chinese today, they can't even comprehend like how long ago their ancestors are.
I mean,
Um,
like, to be fair, Americans can't even comprehend how old history is. Like,
yeah,
to us, history is only 300 years old. When, you know, Chinese civilization predates bronze.
yeah.
It
Uh-huh.
is that is old.
One of my favorite what's it called? Comparisons to make when we're discussing about like how long time periods are in actuality is how the ancient Romans, even during the classical age, saw the Egyptians as old to them as we see the Romans today.
And
And
yeah,
yeah,
and and to them they were seeing like the later dynasties when they were as close to them the new Egypt was as far away from us as old Egypt was to new Egypt. That
yeah.
is some long history.
We
That's
yeah, just a brief
very, very
aside
long.
on Egypt, like the old, middle, and new kingdom are all still like well before the birth of Christ.
Yo, yeah, they're each division of Egyptian history covers thousands of years, covers like 1,000 freaking years. It's freaking
Yeah,
crazy. That is
and
some old history. That is some long history.
yeah, the Chinese, they were starting their own civilizations
Around the
around the
same
same
time.
time as the very ancient Egyptians
Yeah,
also.
and they're
So
you know, and
they have a very
they're
long
the
tradition.
China's the only one still around. You really,
That yeah, no, that's basically true. Yeah.
yeah, you know, gotta get say what you gotta give them prompts for that. You know,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, anyways, so in just giving a brief background about China, China was unified in the ancient period through the Zhou dynasty,
hmm
and they basically focused most on unifying northern China. And then I believe that they began struggling internally and through this is something we'll get into later nomadic invasions from the north and west. So they became fractured, and there was this period called the Warring States period. And this is the period where there was a lot of chaos, a lot of political turmoil. But eventually, the Qin dynasty was able to unify all of China. And the Qin dynasty, even though it only lasted for, I think, 20 years or so under one man, it's not really a dynasty when you think about it like that, but
yeah.
after the death of this emperor who conquered all of mainland China at that point, um, he established this tradition of China breaking and reconstructing, breaking and reconstructing. You
The
see it today.
dynastic cycle. Yeah, he
Yeah.
established. He's the one who created the idea of the dynastic cycle, right?
Yes. Yes. And
So,
and, it, and actually, Qin, which was his dynasty's name, is actually how we derive the name China.
yeah,
Because Qin and translated into Latin or whatnot is China.
yeah.
That's how we call it today. Um, and yeah, after the fall of the Qin dynasty due to like some kind of succession crisis and like turmoil again, the Han dynasty is the one that really started ramping up this unified political center of China that's like where they consider themselves the Middle Kingdom, right? They are the center of the universe, and they are like the biggest kingdom that you could be influenced by. Hey, so my essay question was to compare two classical civilizations
Hmm.
in however way I wanted. So
All
I
right.
chose the Greco-Roman civilization and the classical Chinese civilization, including the Qin and Han Dynasty.
All right.
So, to begin with, I've kind of explained this a little before. I want to share actually a slide show.
Okay. Let's see if the share screen works. Oh, okay.
All right, let's show the
Let's.
screen. Can you see it?
It's still loading for me. Can you see it?
Let me see. Oh, it's not working anymore.
Oh.
Let me try again.
Okay. Yeah. Please stand by for anyone who is listening. We are technical difficulties. Oh, okay. I can see your I can see your shared screen now.
Yeah.
And
So this is the two classical civilizations. To the left, you have the Greco-Roman, which is really at that point the Roman
yeah, this is
Empire.
minus the only part. So this is for Rome. The only part this is almost Rome at its max. The only part it's missing is half of England because this is actually a little bit of so part of Julius Caesar's fame is he invaded into the English Isle, right?
Yes, that's true.
And he only got about halfway up the Isle, and they built a wall. They built a little bit of wall. They built a short little wall, and that one part of that wall still stands, and two, that wall is kind of why we have the English and the Scots, because the Scots are north of that wall, and the English. Sorry, Wales, everyone forgets about you, but the English and Wales are south of that wall, right?
Yes.
Also, fun factoid: that whole wall is like if you've watched Game of Thrones or actually read the books like I have, A Game of Song of Ice and Fire, the northern wall with the barbarians to the north is kind of inspired by the wall in England that was built post Julius Caesar that divided what Rome controlled versus where they stopped.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and like the entire map of the main culture of Westeros in Game of Thrones is basically a supersized version of the English Isle.
That's very interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
But yeah, that's just a little bit. But yeah, like the red for the Roman Empire. The only bit missing is the part where is the little bit of chunk they took of England, which honestly wasn't really worth it. That's one of those cases where it cost more to keep control of the territory than the territory was worth to the empire in profit.
Yeah, I think at that point, the later emperors went out to conquer simply because that was a really easy way of gaining public support, even though it kind of bit them in the butt afterwards.
Well, and after this statement, I want to get back to your essay, but kind of like what kind of divides the Roman Republic from the Roman Empire. Not only kind of the political change of them having an emperor, is that they stop expanding. They've reached the limits, and then after Julius Caesar, they're not expanding anymore. They're just trying to protect what they have, and so they so slowly shrink and shrink and shrink because they can't hold it.
Yeah.
Also, the map of China is weird.
Yeah,
most of that is modern day China. I see they control most of Korea, but they've got this little strip, and then what looks like Mongolia.
Yeah, I think it's somewhere close. Yeah.
Yeah. or parts of
That is
Mongolia.
the
That map's a little weird, and I love it.
yeah. No, there's so many like variations of the Chinese empires
Oh yeah,
throughout its
yeah,
history.
it's
This is one of the
definitely,
weirder ones,
and I
but it all
like
makes
it.
sense in context.
Yeah, I like it. Anyway, so thank you for indulging my little tangent, Anthony. So please
Yeah,
continue.
of course. All right, so this is the next slide. This slide is depicting, the Roman Republic fighting against Carthage. So I think this is one of the easy ways to compare this skirmish of who would control the rest of the Mediterranean.
All right,
Uh,
this is not for the record. The word skirmish implies this was small. Like there were 3 Punic Wars. The
that's true.
first one
That's true.
lasted like 12 fucking years. The second one, which is arguably the most famous one, is fascinating and could be a whole could be a whole multi-hour discussion in and of itself. The third one was kind of a skirmish. They were just mopping. The third one was just Rome mopping the floor with Carthage because they were pissed.
Yeah. Yeah, no, this is very long, very important series of wars, obviously.
The first war had involved millions of soldiers.
Hmm.
Like today, that doesn't surprise us because we're used to think of the world wars, which had millions of soldiers. But it's weird in the
Yeah.
historical context to mobilize that many people for the art of war because
Hmm.
it's just not done. There, again, whole other discussion about why, but like the Punic Wars are a huge deal.
Yeah, and they were really important for like the military innovations at the time with like war boats and like different combat techniques in maritime warfare.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was very important for that reason also.
And it all started because Sicily is weird.
Yeah, you could see, there were many disputes even before the Punic Wars that eventually led to like a full scale wars. Um, but yes, this is one way I want to compare what's it called, the Roman Empire with the
China.
Chinese empires.
Hmm.
How similarly, let me see if I can skip ahead to China.
Ooh.
China before the unification of like the Qin and then the Han was the Warring States period, and
Wait.
similarly, whoever won in the Warring States period would decide the rest of China. They would conquer the rest, and similarly to how like the Romans did, they eventually established themselves as the seal of legitimacy within the Mediterranean.
And there's Britannia. That's
There it is,
that's
yeah.
them controlling half. Also, another bit of a side for anyone who's played like the Dynasty Warrior games. The Warring States period is the time period that most of those games take place in.
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, it's if you
Oh, that makes
if you go back to your could you go back to your China map real quick?
Yeah.
So I don't know if you've ever played the Dynasty. Like, there's the company that does spin-off warrior games, but like the mainline Dynasty Warrior games is usually about the 3 factions, the Chu, the Qin, and the Zhao. And this whole time period right here is what those games are inspired by. This is the Warring States period. This is the romance of the 3 kingdoms. This is their. This is the Chinese Grand Epic. You know,
Mhm.
this is their Camelot, the Knights of
Yeah.
the Round Table period. You know,
Yeah, because beforehand, like Chinese history and civilization was like in some ways still really primitive.
Yeah.
Right? You had a very like almost mystical, historians still not even sure if the first dynasty that's like folktale still like actually existed.
Yeah, there's a good chance she may. Am I saying the right? She?
She, yeah.
Yeah, there's a good chance she like Qi was trying to legitimize his own rule and overthrow rebellion by
Hmm.
claiming the guy who overthrew someone else, and him creating the dynastic cycle, or it was his way of saying, look, this is just how things are done. Eventually, somebody, a ruler loses legitimacy, loses the divine mandate. They get overthrown, and thus
Hmm.
there's a new divine mandate. He
I
is,
got a slide for that.
if you, yeah, there's a argument to make, a pretty strong argument, if you ask me, that he literally just made it up to justify his own rule. You know, and
I mean,
honestly,
that's
like
what it kind of sounds like from
and to
like a
be fair,
Western
and
perspective.
to no, to be fair, we did it. The Westerners, we call it the divine mandate of kings,
Hmm?
where
Yeah,
I'm king because God says I am king.
yeah,
God
no,
gave me a
it's
divine mandate. How's that different than the Chinese will of heaven divine
well, I think that's the
mandate?
fascinating part. How
Yeah.
you're talking about like you know feudal kings, right, all the way like in Western Europe, like
All the way up
the
to
whole
freaking,
divinity, right to
like, that
rule.
idea did not really die until, honestly, it's still around today.
Yeah,
But
no,
that's
yeah.
another. But that's let's not get into that.
You see how like these really far off, like no contact civilizations, they had these,
Same ideas.
legitimacy kind of titles they gave themselves.
Yeah.
So like in the Chinese, this was way before the Qin or the Han, but they had this tradition of the mandate of heaven, right? The right to rule. Even though that the ancient Chinese weren't like super like religious, like they never put like a name to a god, they still believe that the heavens um, had like an authority over the
Well,
world.
and I think it's wrong to say they were super religious. Rather, they were polytheistic, and so there
Yeah,
wasn't. And that is something that's difficult for us to wrap our minds around because most people, if they're religious, they're monotheistic. So there's a god, but the Chinese were very polytheistic. And one of the things with polytheism is you don't focus on, oh, we are going to worship this one entity,
hmm,
and there's statue, and then there's crucifixes everywhere, like in America, right? It's,
yeah,
I'm a cook, so I'm gonna put a shrine to the gods of cooks. Oh, I'm a blacksmith, so I'm gonna have a worship Hephaestus or something. You know, they were
no,
it's
that's true
yeah,
actually.
it's hard for us to wrap our heads around how polytheism worked. And the Chinese are a perfect example because you look, they're very polytheistic, and inside of their polytheism, you had there were poly religion where there are multiple religions. I'm sorry. This is like the little bit one of the few things I remember from my Chinese history classes, where they had Taoism, Confucianism, and Buddhism and Hinduism all blending together and influence each other for this weird polytheist. And like they were polytheist. Part of the things polytheism is you encounter another religion, and it's
Mhm.
just, oh, you have this different names for similar deities or similar
Uh,
concepts. And so everything blends together, and it's hard, except when you have like actual people being priests and monks in temples. For the
yeah,
rest of the
see,
populace, it's hard
yeah,
to.
that came kind of after,
Everything blends together in this
but yeah.
weird Venn diagram, you know?
Yeah, and it's during the Warring States period where a lot of these really popular
Oh yeah,
Chinese
Confucius was around this time.
philosophers. Yeah,
You know,
Confucius. Um, I think Sun Tzu was another for Taoism, and then you get like the later.
okay. Sun Tzu's famous for writing the Art of War. That's not a religious text. It's
Was it Sun
granted
Tzu?
a lot of the time it was practically treated like a religious text, but it's technically not a religious text.
Sorry, I think I'm butchering someone else's name, but
Yeah,
yeah, someone else's name Zhu. I remember that part.
yeah. Sun
Um,
Tzu's Art of War.
yeah, well,
Short read, kind of
yeah.
interesting to read. I recommend reading it.
They came about during the Warring States period and try to give kind of a sense of purpose, and a solution. Right? This was very heavy during that time. Constant warfare and fear of like the nearby tribes and stuff. Um, but yes, the Qin reestablished this mandate of heaven that they were, the legitimate rulers of China. And similarly to the Romans, let me go back to my slide. The Romans had this concept of, during Julius Caesar conquering the rest of the nearby lands, Pax Romana, right? Translated into, peace in Rome. This is super integral to what's it called? The legitimacy of the Roman Empire, the Roman Republic, the dictatorship behind the scenes, that everything is all right. All these invasions, all these wars are all right as long as there's peace. And for most of the territory, that was absolutely true. Conquering the frontiers, the northern frontiers of, blocking the barbarians trying to invade from the north, establishing a peaceful center so that trade and commerce could flourish. That was super integral into the legitimacy and the foundation of the Roman Empire, similar to the Qin, and then the Han. Yeah. So I thought that was a pretty good comparison to make. So let's see.
How much more you got?
I think I'm getting through it, most of it,
right.
pretty quickly now.
All right.
Yeah. So let's see. This is a map, kind of exploring all the trading paths that connected the Roman Empire. So you can see,
notice how most of those are rivers.
Yes. This is something that's also covered, the Roman road within the Roman Empire. As it's a series of roads and connections and canals through these rivers. It was just, when you think of, the divided countries of Europe, in like in the Middle Ages and even in like the modern Europe, it may seem weird how, like, in this diagram, just how everything kind of smoothly connected during the Roman Empire. It truly was a peaceful time where preachers and missionaries from like the Middle East, Christians, they, took advantage of these Roman roads and they spread their culture throughout Western Europe. And that, that's how we get what's called the Western Europe was integrated with the rest of the world because of the Romans. They allowed this trade and transportation of communication, and that's what settled the foundation for most of Western Europe. Comparing that to the Chinese, in the same way that
the Han Empire.
Romans established a northern frontier against the invading barbarians from the north. The Xiongnu Confederacy of northwestern China were similar, like nomadic invasions against the Han Empire at this time.
From that's the Asiatic steppe. It's the same place. The Mongols and the Huns and the Turks actually came from the Asiatic steppe. A lot. It's the Great Plains of Asia, to use a North American perspective.
Just on a side note, throughout like world history, it's a little sad how little, like Central and like Northern Asia is kind of given, because we kind of just associate it with like kind of barren, like what's it called, Siberia. No one really loves that kind of stuff. But in reality, in world history, they were really like strong conquerors.
Yeah, and there's two reasons for that. There's the phrase "history is written by the victors," which is technically inaccurate. History is written by historians, which means history is written by people who write things down. And the thing with the Huns and all the groups you just mentioned, they said part of the issue with being nomadic, you don't sit down and create printing presses, you know? And
Yeah.
so they were nomadic, and so all of our what information we do have about them was written by their enemies.
Yeah.
You know, that's the other issue is yes, there are time periods where they're very influential, but those are kind of the exceptions. That's when one person managed to unite the whole plains. You know,
Mhm.
this is where you get Genghis Khan. This is where you get Attila the Hun, right?
Yeah.
But note, but like those, they're kind of an Alexander the Great problem. You have this
Hmm.
one guy who managed to unite a large force for like a generation. And then, but once he dies, it starts fracturing immediately. It starts fracturing. Granted, Genghis Khan's actually survived a little longer because he managed to set up a system of inheritance. And so his empire lasted a few generations longer, but then that empire split up as well.
Hmm. Yeah.
But it's a matter of centralization where
Hmm.
you know the anti-authoritarian in me is hating how effective authoritarian is, but that is how it works. But that's kind of how it works.
Hmm.
These we You don't hear about these places for hundreds of years. Then someone comes along, unites everybody, and like a
Hmm.
hammer, they smash through everything.
Yeah.
But then once the hilt's gone, everything falls apart.
Yeah. And well, at least in this brief time, there was an actual kind, it's a semi-unification, the
Yeah.
Zhongnu Confederacy, series of nomads, the Zhongnu nomads. They what's it called, kind of unified at a time to kind of try to defeat the Han, but the Han retaliated. They were able to conquer a lot of their territory, and in similar fashion to the Romans, they settled a frontier. This is fun fact, actually, where the Great Wall of China started as a buffer against the northern nomads. Um, Let me see. This is where we get this stretch of land to the west of China, right? Um, it's better to settle the territory in your place rather than to let someone else control it.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So even though it wasn't as developed as, obviously the north or the far east part of China, it was still technically a part of the Han um, territory. And yeah, this is where we lead into the Silk Road. Oh
Oh,
my god!
Silk Road.
Yes,
This is like
this is like world history, just like nerd.
this is no this like the Silk Road is the Silk history
Yeah,
gold mine because it's all about
it's like
the
everything's
world.
connected.
People think about the ancient world. Nobody was the world was connected. Everybody was in these little pockets. It's like, look at this. First
Yeah.
off, I love the how really it was about sea routes, right?
Hmm.
Because that's what people think it's all about, like the land route. When most of the route was ocean.
Hmm.
And again, this is one of the few bits of ancient history I've kind of looked into with the the spice trade and everything, and it's why Egypt was so important. It's why India was so
Hmm.
freaking wealthy for such a very long time, because they were not only did they produce a lot of spices, they were a hub for the spice trade.
Yes, yes.
You know?
The East, China, India, like until Columbus, they wanted those trade routes. Like
Oh yeah,
that was the whole point.
they were trying to find they were trying to find another. Granted, like this route shows that people in Europe knew how to sailed to India and China. Like, there's a lot of stuff like Marco Polo's whole story was
Mhm.
like he made a lot of it up, but he had enough information correct where people are pretty sure he probably did, if not
Mhm.
travel all the way to China, travel at least to India.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
the dude, like granted, the story itself was made up, but he actually he actually had references of, oh, this is a story I heard, but instead of saying it's a story I heard, I'm gonna claim to be the person in the story. Yeah,
Mm.
so it it's actually kind of funny though because like the Europeans, went by the time of Columbus, so, right, they thought Marco Polo's information was still correct, so they thought the Hans were still in control of China.
Oh wow.
Yeah, no, they were like
Wow.
Europe. The Europeans were in like I
Yeah.
as historians, we're not supposed to use the term Dark Age anymore, right?
Yeah.
We're like, but I get why we use the term Dark Age because
Yeah.
Europe
Well,
was so
after the
cut off.
fall, after the fall of the western part of the Roman Empire, they, cut the
Like,
lines, right? Like there was
like,
no more like real connection to the Far East like there was in
and
Rome.
like keep in mind, no, like they were still getting pepper.
Yeah, yeah,
Like
no, that's
like things
true.
like pepper, like most spices, including like pepper, the most to us is the most basic spice. But like spices, stuff like pepper does not grow in Europe, but Europeans used a lot of pepper. There was back and forth trade, but little back and forth communication. So little that
Mhm.
in 1492, when Columbus sailed the ocean blue, they still thought the Hans were in control of China, which is the wrong dynasty by a few centuries. That's how wrong. That's how outdated their information was, and it's kind of funny. Which is why I get why the term Dark Ages began and stuck, because Europe was, as a whole, their information was just bad about everything. You know, east of the Ottomans.
Yeah.
East of what we would call modern day Turkey. You know,
Mhm.
anything east of that, they were like, might as well be Narnia. They had no idea what was going on, and it's kind of funny.
Yeah. And just China being so far from like, I don't know. It's really funny when you think of it like a geological standpoint, where like, you know, ancient Greece, ancient Rome, they're just so far, like thousands and thousands of kilometers just away, from like mainland China,
Hmm.
and then once you start interconnecting through these trade
Oh yeah,
routes, the map suddenly becomes a lot smaller,
yeah,
right? Eurasia becomes a lot smaller, a lot more connected.
yeah,
It's a lot less insular.
yeah. And the yeah, it's kind of interesting because you know it's weird. Like uh, we consider Europe its own continent, but look at this map. Where's the line between Europe and China? Yeah, between Europe and the rest of quote unquote Asia.
Yeah.
Europe is honestly a like physically just like a peninsula of China. I'm sorry, not China, of Asia.
Yeah. No,
It's
that's
just
true.
like a like landmass what? Like Africa, yeah, there's except for that little bit between Egypt and Arabia, it's physically disconnected except for a tiny little land bridge. So yeah, you can cut that off. That makes sense. But
Mhm.
Europe and quote unquote Asia,
Yeah.
it's physically connected.
Hmm.
Granted, they're culturally distinct. You
Hmm.
know, there's a now. Granted, this creates the problem of when does Europe end and Asia begin? That's a whole other can of worms. Because like, what are Russians? Are Russians Asian? Are
My
they
answer to that is
European?
always, there's a
You know,
thing called transcontinental countries.
and My
That's what a
answer
lot of empires
is
were.
it's all a bunch of made up stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's
So,
just historians trying to categorize in ways that make
oh
our
yeah,
brains
yeah,
feel
we
good.
have to. Yeah, but the point I'm trying to make is that it's things we take for granted as fundamental, like just thing as innate. We we pretend and act like these things are innate. You know, like a,
Hmm.
but they're really not.
Yeah.
That was the point I'm trying to make. That was the point I was trying to get to.
No. Yeah. And
But yeah, I love
and
this picture, by the way.
yeah, I found it in like 2 seconds. Um, what I love about this map is, you can see, the different regional powers, right?
Hmm.
But yeah, again, they're all connected through these like land trades, these sea lanes, and you get this connection where
Yeah.
the east, the west,
Shows why
um,
the uh, Venice and the Genossians in Italy were so rich because
yes,
Italy's a good trade hub, and those are the two trade hub cities.
yes, um, yeah, and so this is just a way how like they're all connected, they're compared. Um, oh yeah, and just a brief cover, how just during the Julian and then you know emperors that came after him conquered much of Iberia, which included Spain and Portugal, Gaul, which at that time was considered Gaul, not France, but it would later change. Britannia in the north, they would conquer the northern frontier. They would conquer Greece and then much of northern Africa. Northern Africa would stay for a really long time afterwards. Like Northern Africa is not to be forgotten, which I really appreciate. I think just on
Well,
a side note, African history is pretty extensive. It's not very just colonialism.
well, the interesting thing is this is true for both the Roman Empire and the Byzantine Empire.
Hmm.
Though some of their most valuable regions were North Africa.
Yeah, I mean Carthage.
Egypt, yeah,
Carthage
Egypt
was
was the
established in North
breadbasket.
Africa.
Carthage was very profitable for both empires and for the Ottomans when they held it. Egypt was, for a very now, we think of like Africa, that part of Africa is just this big desert, but like the coast of Africa, the coast of northern Africa that hits the Mediterranean Sea is kind of like California, where they just get this crazy mix of very warm
Ooh,
but a lot of rainfall. So it's
that's a really
very
good way to put it,
profitable.
actually. Yeah,
Actually,
no, that's a
let's put it this way: California climate is called Mediterranean climate. Yeah,
yeah.
Northern Africa and the Egypt along the Nile, at least in this time period, I don't know how true that is in 21st century sense, but in for a lot of Roman and Byzantine and Ottoman history, controlling North Africa was like controlling multiple Californias in terms of farm production. You've got this part of the world that's almost always warm and gets a lot of because it's right by the water, gets a good amount of rainfall. Unlike California, which is, you know, thankfully we have the Rocky Mountain range for some rivers. You know,
Hmm.
haven't gotten a lot of rain for a while,
Yeah.
but it's a part of the world that's just always warm and not a desert. At least at this time in history.
Yeah. Yeah, global temperatures will fluctuate
Oh yeah,
afterwards. But
there's a part of the change that actually happens. You have literally a period of time that's called like the Roman climate optimum, I think is the term. Literally,
yeah.
like historians have given this time period a term when
Mhm.
the climate changed and it kind of fucked up the Romans because their bread basket was not producing as much bread.
Yeah. Yeah, that I think the fall of the Roman Empire is really extensive, but it's another discussion.
Yeah, another discussion. Very fascinating. I've looked into it, and every time I look into it, I find something new.
Yeah. No, there's so many variables. Yeah. Anyway, yes, and then the Roman Empire would extend all the way into far west Asia, like um the Anatolian Peninsula and Palestine,
Hmm.
and Egypt, of course. In a similar fashion, where is it? Go one too far. Yeah, I guess you can see from this map. But China, the Han Chinese Empire, they would also extend, again, like I mentioned, the western northern frontiers of the Zhongnu Confederacy.
All right.
But also, they would extend their influence all the way into, northern Korea. This is the first time they'll invade Korea, and it will be a tradition for them invading Korea.
Poor Korea. Always.
Yeah.
Poor Korea. Just poor Korea.
And then also conquering the South. That was also a really big deal. For most of really early ancient China, it was all in the north, along the Yellow River. Then they'll conquer the South, which containing the Yangtze and the Pearl River, and extending all the way down into even northern Vietnam. This is where Vietnam will be influenced by early, Chinese philosophy, also Korea. So they're integrating more of these nearby territories. Just gonna put my phone in charge real quick. I don't want it to die.
You're upside down.
Oh, I am. Oh shoot! No. Oh shit! I'm gonna have to. Oh, this is scuffed, but Let me see. Okay, let me try this. Oh, I'm still upside down. Alright, whatever. This is cool.
There you go. All right.
Alright, I'm back. Sorry, everybody.
Yay.
Okay, and yes, okay, and then this is something also I wanted to bring up. This is kind of my idea, but in the Chinese tradition, they've always seen themselves as the Middle Kingdom. They are in the center of their kind of universe in Asia. They're the ones who, produce these philosophers, these kinds of art, pottery, Chinaware will come out of this. That will extend. They are. Oh, did I make camera freeze again? Oh, Jesus. Oh, man. What happened?
I can still hear you. So let's all right, your camera's working again. Continue, please.
Yeah. So the middle. No, what happened? Okay, I'm back.
No,
Oh my
I can
gosh.
still see your. I can still see the map. I can see you moving. Let's go.
So China being the Middle Kingdom, in a similar fashion, Rome kind of became that middle hub for all of Europe. Rome really is kind of the center of this empire, and it stretches through these Roman roads. And after the fall of the Roman Empire, so many kingdoms and so-called empires. I'm looking at you, Holy Roman Empire. They will try to reclaim this omnipotent,
idea.
almost Roman, legacy.
Hmm.
You see this with like Napoleon. You see this
Yeah.
Hitler, Charlemagne,
Mussolini.
and yeah, this is just a quick comparison I like to think in my head. Chinese unification, control of all of Europe. These are kind of ideas that kind of go back and forth throughout history within these two territories. All right, so I think we're coming to a close. Let me see if there's anything left. Oh yeah, and just something real quick I wanted to discuss was like the social comparison between the two. So in the Roman Empire, obviously they took a lot of inspiration from the Greek philosophers, establishing a republic, forms of democracy, and in a similar fashion, what's it called? Not in a similar fashion, but in a similar philosophical influence in their regions. China brought about, Confucianism, and something I think I'd like to mention and highlight the civil service system.
Ah, the civil service exams. My
Hmm.
favorite part of Chinese history.
This was an institution which, based on Confucianism, uh, highly valued education. Like, at least to my perspective, it's like to a degree you wouldn't expect out of like ancient history. Think of ancient history as in like warfare, just
Oh yeah, yeah,
tribalism,
no, yeah. The
that
the
kind of
the
stuff.
civil service exams were not perfect. A lot of it had more. A lot of it was simply focused on route memorization instead of like having your own opinions. But it was definitely the idea of, hey, we need people who are qualified for these positions. So let's create a test.
Yeah.
Is sound, and they came up like the Europeans didn't figure that out until like the 1700s.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. They truly embraced like one of the first ever like meritocracies. Um,
on
just
paper anyway. You know,
on paper, yeah,
yeah,
but it
there are a
was
lot of problems with that where it's
yeah.
like, oh, you need like the test became so hard at a point where the only way to pass the tests was to be wealthy enough to afford tutors,
Yeah.
and you kind of
You
create a
know,
cycle where people like get the equivalent of master's degrees, because the only way to like get an actual good position is to like be get the top level degrees, which means you've got like today a PhD, which means everyone else is either middle management or they're a tutor for the
mhm.
civil service exam.
You
Which
can make the comparisons to today.
yeah, to be fair, like that's not the worst system of government we've seen in history. It's one of the better ones.
Yeah.
There's a lot like most forms of government are simply, oh, you're my cousin, twice removed. You get a job. You know? It's
Yeah.
like at least there's like they couldn't take the tests for them. Like they were very strict on trying to get rid of cheaters. Like you at least had to take the people at least had to take the test themselves.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Um, so the Roman Empire was, after the establishment of the Roman Empire, that these empires first citizens, um, to my surprise, learning about this, they were not exclusively to just Roman, you know, mainland city citizens. The Roman Empire really made an effort to try to include all of the conquered people into this Romanized system, this Greco-Romanized system.
hmm
And so you see future emperors from different regions, although they're probably from the same, wealth standpoint kind of stuff.
yeah,
You
they're the
know,
rich people from the colonies, but they're still
yeah,
from the colonies.
yeah, but yeah, they're still from the colonies, and so this kind of like not to the similar extent of this meritocracy, but you still see, these foundations of uh, democracy, involving yourself in these public politics. Even the lower classes, they had their I forget what it's called, but they had their space in politics also.
Yeah,
Um,
like they could still,
the plebeians
yeah,
had their systems of democracy, and so yeah, although they're not to like one on one exactly the same, they still had this fundament foundation of you know educated public, participating in politics in the greater government. Um, and yeah, they both really prospered because of this. The civil service exams are like still like widely practiced,
yeah.
um, and yeah, became like a staple in Chinese government.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add to the
No,
discussion, but
we're reaching the hour mark, and I think this is a good place to cap it off.
yeah.
For anyone who's listening, again, I'm Forrest,
Oh, and I'm Anthony.
and we are the Historical Students Association. If you have a topic you would like to talk about, please contact the Student History Association in some way. There's our student Discord. We have our Twitter account. We have Instagram. I don't, Anthony's more familiar with how Instagram works than me because I'm an old man and I still remember MySpace. So that's dating myself a little bit. I miss you, Tom.
What?
Ma, ma. And so, but yeah, there's multiple ways to contact us. If you have a topic you'd like to talk about for a little bit, just contact us, and we will do our best to arrange a time for you to talk about something that you have looked into. But with that, this has been the Historical Students Association podcast, and go Gators!